Farm Fresh has set its initial public offering price at RM1.35 per share. The group will have a market capitalisation of RM2.5 billion upon listing on the main market of Bursa Malaysia on March 22nd, with an enlarged share capital of 1.86 billion shares. This values the dairy producer at approximately 69 times its FY 2021 profit of RM36.2 million and 36 times its adjusted profit of RM69 million after taking into consideration factors that include one-off tax liability expenses which are not part of its core earnings. It will raise about RM1 billion in an offer for sale of up to 520.2 million shares and a public issue of 223 million new shares. This makes it Malaysia's largest IPO since June 2021. Farm Fresh said it will use the proceeds raised to establish a new manufacturing hub, dairy farm and integrated processing facility in Malaysia, fund the expansion of a production facility in Australia and regional expansion, as well as for working capital together with listing expenses. The IPO secured a record 30 cornerstone investors, the most seen in a Malaysian IPO to date. The cornerstone investors will take up approximately 80% of the institutional offering tranche under the IPO. CIMB Group Holdings saw its fourth quarter FY 21 net profit jump close to 4 times to RM854.51 million from RM214.98 million a year ago due to significantly lower provisions, according to its filing with the bourse. Revenue, however, fell 1.68% to RM4.59 million from RM4.67 million a year ago. For FY 21, the group's earnings also surged nearly fourfold to RM4.3 billion from RM1.19 billion a year earlier, while revenue rose 14.87% to RM19.51 billion from RM16.99 billion. It proposed a second interim dividend of 12.55 cents per share, bringing the total proposed annual dividend for FY 21 to 22.99 cents per share for a payout ratio of 50% of core net profit. The lender said the improved year-on-year performance was driven by higher operating income, with recovery across all segments and markets, and further supported by strong cost controls and significantly lower provisions. While the outlook remains mixed and uncertain, the group's CEO Dato' Abdul Rahman Ahmad believes the economies the group operates in will show further recovery this year due to the significant progress of vaccination programs and the opening up of economic activities. He said CIMB is also hopeful of the progressive migration of customers out of repayment assistance over the year. The Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, or MACC, is said to be seeking assistance from the US Department of Justice and the Brooklyn Federal Court over former Goldman Sachs banker Tim Leisner's testimony regarding former Astro Malaysia Holdings Group Chief Executive Officer Datuk Rohana Roshan. A source within the MACC confirmed this development with theedgemarkets.com and also affirmed that an asset said to be owned by Rohana had been frozen by the MACC investigators to assist in the probe. Last Friday, Rohana issued a brief statement through her lawyers, confirming she had been called by the MACC and pledged her full cooperation in their investigations. Leisner reportedly testified in his former subordinate Roger Ng's graft trial in connection with 1MDB last Tuesday that a media CEO with whom the American had an affair had allegedly blackmailed him into buying her a $10 million home. According to a Bloomberg report, Leisner identified the person as Rohana and said that he bought the property in London in 2013 after she had threatened to expose his involvement with 1MDB. Malaysia Airports Holdings, or MAHB, saw its full-year net loss narrow to RM766.44 million from RM1.12 billion a year earlier, despite revenue falling to 1.67 billion ringgit from 1.87 billion ringgit. This as fourth quarter net loss shrank amid lower core expenses and revenue jumped, helped by the easing of global movement curbs, which led to a significant jump in MHB's passenger volume. Quarterly net loss narrowed to 136.73 million ringgit from a net loss of 685.02 million ringgit a year earlier, while top line rose to 551.34 million ringgit from 263.64 million ringgit. On its outlook, the airport's operator said that specifically for Malaysia, demand arising from the VTL program and Umrah travel should result in an increase in international passenger movements. Continued positive recovery momentum is expected in Turkey. MHB is also positive amid the impending reopening of Malaysia's borders and those of its key regional air travel markets. It expects improved rental yields with the ongoing commercial reset initiative at various airports in Malaysia and additional revenue from new land developments at KLIA Aeropolis and Subang Airport. Serba Holdings booked its second straight quarterly loss as revenue further plummeted across key operating segments. The troubled oil and gas services provider said net loss widened to 290.33 million ringgit in the second quarter of FY22 from 42.11 million ringgit in the first quarter of FY22. Top line fell 77.8% quarter-on-quarter to 177.14 million ringgit on dwindling operations and maintenance and engineering, procurement, construction and commissioning activities in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates and Malaysia. Serba said the Middle East contributed 90.56 million ringgit or 51.12% of revenue in the current quarter under review. Malaysia accounted for 44.1 million ringgit or 24.89% of the total. The group also has operations in Indonesia, Turkmenistan, India, Tanzania and the United Kingdom. For the first half of FY22, Serba posted a net loss of 332.44 million ringgit on revenue of 976.49 million ringgit, of which 65.5% was derived from the Middle East, with another 26.7% from Malaysia. On prospects, it expects operations to remain challenging. It's also pledged to resolve ongoing issues, including its restructuring and regularization plan in the best interest of stakeholders.